Why is there something it is like to be you? Modern neuroscience can map the brain with remarkable precision. We can trace the cascade of neural activity that occurs when an organism perceives a stimulus, processes that data, and controls its behavior. Yet, after all the mechanical and chemical explanations are exhausted, a question remains. Why is any of this processing accompanied by an internal experience? This highlights the difference between problems of mechanism and the problem of experience. Problems of mechanism involve identifying the neural circuits and computational processes that produce a response. We solve these by documenting the system's functional organization, showing how the parts work together to achieve a specific result. The problem of experience is different. Even with a perfect computational model of the brain, we have to ask, why doesn't all this processing happen in the dark? This gap in our understanding represents a structural limit of physical explanation. The methods we use to describe matter may be incapable of reaching the subjective nature of the mind. If consciousness is truly irreducible, then the relationship between mind and matter requires a different kind of framework, one that looks beyond the simple mechanics of the brain. In physical science, we rely on reduction. Once you understand the molecular structure of H2O, macroscopic properties follow logically. There is no missing information. But these explanations work because the properties are relational, defining how components interact within a system. Contrast this with the experience of pain. Identifying the neural firing associated with an injury doesn't explain why that firing actually hurts. Even with perfect knowledge of neural dynamics, the felt quality of the pain, the burning or throbbing sensation, remains outside the description. This suggests that the explanatory gap is not a matter of missing data. It is a conceptual chasm built into our very way of describing the world. Physics describes what things do and how they relate to other things. It cannot, however, reach the intrinsic, qualitative character of what an experience is like for the subject. Because physical descriptions are limited to these external relations, they fail to account for the internal reality of consciousness. Physics focuses on structure and dynamics. It tells us how matter behaves, but not what matter is in itself. The scientific method achieves objectivity by systematically removing the observer's perspective from the measurement. This creates a paradox, because consciousness is, by definition, perspective. When we apply objective methods to consciousness, we eliminate the very thing we are trying to study. Scientific observation requires a viewpoint. A view from nowhere is structurally unable to see the existence of viewpoints themselves. This makes any theory that demands purely objective verification for consciousness problematic. It asks us to ignore the phenomenon's essential nature in order to prove it exists. Imagine a being physically identical to you, lacking all internal experience. It performs every task you can, but entirely in the dark. If this mindless duplicate is logically coherent, then physical facts alone do not determine the facts of experience. This is illustrated by the case of a neuroscientist who knows every physical detail of color vision, but has lived her entire life in a black and white room. When she sees a red apple for the first time, she learns something new. She learns what the experience of red is actually like. Her exhaustive physical knowledge was missing the qualitative character. Some argue that consciousness is an illusion, but this creates a new problem. An illusion requires a subject to experience a seeming. That act of seeming is itself an experiential state that needs an explanation. Another response is epiphenomenalism, which suggests consciousness is a causally inert byproduct, like steam rising from a locomotive. But if consciousness cannot influence the physical world, then our spoken reports about our experiences are entirely disconnected from the experiences themselves. A person claiming to have an experience, while also claiming that experience has no physical effect, is caught in a logical contradiction. If the physical world cannot fully account for experience, we must also question the idea of substrate independence. Functional organization depends on physical arrangement. If physical facts don't explain phenomenal ones, then replicating a brain's function in silicon may not replicate its consciousness. Materialism often forces us to either deny the reality of our inner lives or treat them as useless byproducts. This suggests it is an incomplete model of reality. Every major framework for understanding the mind faces its own significant challenges. Panpsychism struggles with the combination problem, explaining how tiny micro-experiences and particles could ever merge into a single unified subject. Idealism finds it difficult to explain why our experiences follow such consistent and independent physical laws. After decades of research, the explanatory gap remains. Physicalism has yet to provide a derivation that bridges the distance between neurons and feelings. The unfinishable map proposes interactionist dualism, the idea that the physical world and consciousness both exist, and they interact. This leads to the interaction problem. How does something non-physical exert an influence on a physical system? One possibility is that consciousness influences physical outcomes at a level where physics is not deterministic. Quantum mechanics offers a potential parallel, showing us junctions where events are probabilistic rather than fixed. This is where consciousness might select between outcomes. Our preference for simple physical explanations may be a result of how our brains are wired to think, rather than a reflection of how the universe actually works. Without a way to account for experience, our map of the universe remains incomplete. We must recognize consciousness as a fundamental and causally active feature of our reality.